All right, joining me once again here on the Matthew Filipovich Show is my good buddy Greg Kaufmann. Greg is the writer of This Week in Poverty, the weekly column at The Nation magazine, which focuses on the plight of the poor, which you can again find at thenation.com. You can also find Greg on Twitter at Greg Kaufmann with 2 N's. Greg, thank you so much for being on the show again.
It's always great to talk with you, Matt.
All right, so Greg, I think it was about a year ago, I think it was like last January, where you wrote about and actually discussed on this show the idea of the poverty activist community trying to shift away from defense and actually going on offense and trying to actually unite around a core group of, say, 3 or 4 demands. Let's start out by reviewing what were your suggestions for possible demands and where did this whole idea come from?
Well, the idea came from the fact that basically at this point, we've got more than 1 in 3 Americans living below twice the poverty line. So that's less than about $36,000 for a family of 3. So that might not be official poverty, but it does mean that, that means more than 1 in 3 Americans are struggling to afford the basics, just the basics if you think about food, housing, health care, education, and a little bit of savings. So I felt like more and more Americans can really tap into the struggles of, we used to sort of separate poverty, people in poverty and other people. And really, we're all kind of in the same boat at this point. And so the idea around these proposals was, hey, instead of just working on, groups working on food and some groups working on housing and some groups working on health care, how can we unite, grow our numbers, and sort of appeal to really mainstream America, issues that affect both low-income and middle-income people. So, when we last talked, I'd written this proposal. The first and most obvious was uniting around raising the minimum wage, and obviously we're seeing some good traction with that right now. But historically, the minimum wage could lift a family of 3 out of poverty. But as you know, it isn't indexed to inflation. So now, if you work full time, which very few people working minimum wage can get full time hours, you still only would make $15,000 a year. So the idea is, that just is an affront to basic standard of decency that you can work your ass off and you're still in poverty. And not only that, you get criticized for not spending enough time with your kids because you're working like 3 jobs. I remember talking to some janitors on strike in Houston, and they were saying they were reading articles about how they're not spending enough time on their kids' education. And it's like, well, give me a decent wage. So that's the most obvious thing for us to unite around. You look at paid leave, paid family leave, and paid sick leave. Nobody should have to choose between their paycheck and taking care of a sick child or themselves or someone in their family. And yet only 34% of low-wage workers have access to paid leave. And, you miss a paycheck. If you're a low-income person, you miss a paycheck, maybe you're going to get fired, but even just missing a paycheck, you might not make rent. If you get behind on rent, you might lose your place. And we know that there's less and less affordable housing available out there. So that seemed an obvious choice. Childcare, same idea. Middle income and low income people, tough to go to work if you don't have an affordable, safe place for your kids to go. And yet about half the states last year got worse in their childcare accessibility and accessibility laws and opportunities. So I think nationally about 1 in 8 people who qualify for child care assistance actually get it. But and some states do better and some states do worse. Obviously, that's an average. But the point is, even for middle income and upper income people, why can't we just have affordable, safe places like other industrialized nations? It's just too big a hit to people's wallets. At the time of January, and I've sort of suggested scaling back this agenda to just get started, but at the time I'd suggested, why can't we unite around ending childhood hunger? Like, that seems a very American thing to do. But we have 50 million food insecure people. I can't remember what that number of kids is. It's 16 million households. And when you say food insecure, that means people who don't necessarily know where their next meal is coming from and can't meet their basic food needs. And so we know that the average SNAP benefit, which was at that time that I wrote it, Matt, was about $1.50 for a meal. For a person
Living the high life. Living the high life with
I mean, all these
$1.50 a
people
meal.
say people are dependent on living off of food stamps. It's crazy, and that was just cut, of course, to $1.40 on November 1st. So that just again emphasizes our need to unite our numbers and power.
And we're debating now about cutting it, $40 billion, which is what the Republicans want, or $4 billion, which is what the Democrats want.
Right. The Democrats are starting with a cut, which it raises questions about what does this party actually stand for. If you can do that when we know there are so many hungry people out there. And then the other one that's I think an exciting and important opportunity is subsidized jobs. During the recession, through the Recovery Act, 260,000 subsidized jobs were created. So the federal government was paying part of the wage, and private sector businesses that wouldn't have otherwise hired people, and most of the people stayed on when the subsidy ended in those jobs, and they targeted disadvantaged populations. I mean, we have a huge unemployment rate, youth unemployment rate, which I can't quote to you right now, but people can look it up easily enough. And, Republican governors were on board with that. So both Democrat and Republican governors wanted it, and yet Congress, of course, wouldn't reenact that. So that was another issue. Now, more recently, I said, hey, if that's too ambitious, why not? Can we just at least unite around minimum wage, paid leave, and child care, things that every working American has an interest in? Because a higher wage floor at the minimum wage obviously affects people above that wage floor as well. So, that was my most recent proposal, Matt. And, there are a good 6 groups or so. I mentioned in the article, Jessica Bartholow out at the Western Center has been working with more than 6 groups, but I think 6 so far have signed on a proposal very similar to the one we just discussed. And so they're going to roll it out soon. But what really needs to happen, and then they've been working, she does a lot of work, and the organizations she works with do a lot of work in low-income communities. So they're consulting people, not just writing this among policymakers. And that's going to be key. We got to organize from within communities and let the people most affected by these issues sort of lead the way. So we'll see what happens with that.